Welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from January 15th, 2021, and I'm recording this on July 16th, 2021. As always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. They each put out a list of 10 books every week that are hot that week. And we look at them 6 months later to try to see what books, why they were hot, understand why they were hot, what factors have continued to keep them hot, what factors have changed, what's going on with these books, so that we can all make a little better decisions, see the patterns, so that we're not chasing books we should be patient on, or being patient on books maybe we need to go on and get. So that's what we're doing. We got 17 books to discuss this week. So let's see what we can learn. First up, we got Port of Earth, #1. Now, this book had actually been optioned like 2 years ago, but there were rumors that maybe it was finally starting production back then, caused raw copies to jump to 20 plus. Now they're literally $1 to $20 for a raw copy. 9.8s are sitting 90 to 140. So this one's definitely down, a bit of an I'll be back. And I'll say even the 9.8 prices, even though they didn't list them back then, even like late May, early June, they were going for around 200 plus for 9.8. And then late June here and into July, it's been down around that $90 to $140 range. So this book is definitely coming back down. Not a lot of interest or information coming out about this anytime recently, so it's definitely cooled back off. Very common for these books that are in production or optioned. Next, we have Punisher #13, and this is politics putting a book on the list. I'm not going to go too deep into this because this stuff I just prefer to avoid, but basically some groups have been using the Punisher symbol. There's been calls for Marvel to distance themselves from these groups because of the violence and other things that they're promoting. So basically, this was a story back in 2018 that kind of dealt with this during a previous issue. They dealt with, the symbol and people misusing his symbol, or at least in his mind, misusing his symbol. This book jumped up to $10 to $15 back then when this was happening again. There was discussions about this again. It's still a $10 to $15 book. It's been pretty steady. Not a ton of sales of this book, but definitely pretty steady. It's a $10 to $15 book because of this cover and because of the content in the book relating to some of the controversies around his symbol. That's as far as I'm going to get into it. But yeah, that's why the book hit the list. That's why it still has a little bit of value. With that, the rest of these are covers. You could argue that was maybe a cover. First up, we have Darth, well, not the rest, but the next several are covers, I should say. First, we have Darth Vader #9, the design 1 in 10 variant. And this is basically, in this issue, he's rebuilding his suit and his arm and leg and some other stuff. So that's why the design variant was kind of appropriate here. Back then, raw copies were going for $15 to $30 at release. Still going 10 to 20, which is a little above ratio, but definitely down. Another kind of I'll be back books so far this week. Next, we have a book that was on the list for the second week in a row, not on the week for the second list in a row. We have Iron Man #5, the Frank Cho 1 in 25, this Hellcat variant that has gotten a lot of interest. Back then, well, when we talked about it last week, it was going 50 to 80. By this point, it was up to 100 to 125 for this book, which is quadruple ratio, which a lot of times they get that high, they stay. This one did not really. It's still set 40 to 90. Last week we talked about it being steady and kind of worth it from those prices, but it overpeaked and has dropped back down from this peak. So now it's kind of I'll be back because of that. So definitely down from the highest peak. So this is not unusual. Books, like, if you get them just before the peak or just after, they sometimes settle in there. But a lot of times the peak itself is a little too high for a book, which is no surprise. It wouldn't be a peak otherwise. Otherwise, it just kept going. So next we have King in Black, Gwenom versus Carnage #1. This is the In-Hyuk Lee 1 in 25, and this features the first version of Mary Jane Carnage. I forget the way they did it, but anyway, this Gwen cover. So caused this book to jump to $100 to $125 book. Raw copies now are set in $70 to $100. 9.8 will cost you $175 to $200. So still a lot of heat around this 1 in 25. Still going for triple to quadruple ratio at $70 to $100. Just down a little bit from where it peaked right after its release. So a little bit of an I'll be back, but still carrying a lot of value for this particular cover. Next, we have a color that did not make JP's channel. Not safe for JP's channel. This is Hot Valley Days and Cocaine Nights number 2 from 2021. Basically, there's 2 versions of this. This cover at release was going for 50 plus. Now it's going for 120 plus, but that's based on one sale. But there's no listings for this, so this one's up. Super hard to find this one. I will say there's 2 versions of this cover if you find it. Neither one of them am I going to put on my channel necessarily, but one does have nudity and the other one does not. But it's the other activity that I'm not going to put on my channel. But so anyway, this is the nudity one that we're talking about. The really not safe for JP's channel. Next, we're going to move into some comic buzz. And first up, we have Ha Ha number 1. This was a hot indie of the week that came out. Kind of a new indie horror comic that people were talking about. The A cover back then was going for $10 to $30. Raw copies were going for $5 to $15 now. 9.8s are only going $30 to $60. So this has definitely been almost a trap, I would argue, but definitely on I'll Be Back. So this one has definitely dropped back down. Next on another indie series, this is Serial number 1. This was a new Terry Moore series. He hadn't made anything for a little while, so this new series had a lot of buzz. Raw copies back then were going for $10 to $15, and this one's kind of stayed $5 to $20. So I would argue this has been pretty steady. A little bit of an I'll be back, because occasionally you can get it for around cover price. 9.8 of this book, they'll go for a little bit more at $80 to $100. So this one's continued a little bit more buzz than Ha Ha, but both of them have kind of settled in the double cover kind of location that you can pretty much get a copy for. Next, we're going to do Aquaman number 57. This is the first appearance of Andy Curry. And she basically, this was kind of her introduction, and then she played a big role in Future State, and that's what was playing a big role in Future State, and that's what caused this book to hit the list. Raw copies were going for $30 back then. Now they're $10 to $15. 9.8s are going $30 to $60. So another one that's dropped back considerably. So yeah, another one, I put I'll Be Back, but you could argue this is a trap. It's basically half or less than what it was going for back then. Our next Future State book was Future State Teen Titans number 1. First appearance of Red X in continuity. Basically, this has been the big mystery. Who is Red X? That's launched their Teen Titans Academy book that I think they still haven't revealed it yet. There's several issues in. So there's a lot of buzz about this character from the old Titans TV show, Teen Titans cartoon, that nobody ever knew who it was, and still don't, I don't think, but there was a lot of buzz here. $15 to $20 back then at release. Now it's sitting $10 to $25. 9.8s are going $60 to $125. So I'm calling this one steady and kind of worth it, because it's creeping up a little bit more. Sitting more in that 20-25 range, but occasionally going for 10. So yeah, so that's where I'm at on this book. But we'll see what the big reveal brings on Red X. Is it somebody truly new? Is it a character we know and love that's got a different alternate identity? Be interesting to find out where this is going. Next, our last Comic Buzz book of the week is Ruins of Ravencroft, Carnage number 1. This is the first appearance of Cortland Cassidy, and basically he was brought back into the King in Black story. Apparently he was resurrected, some other stuff. So that's where this character is hitting the list. Back then, raw copies were going for 15, 9.8s were going for 100. Still going 5 to 20, 9.8s 50 to 100. So most of the sales are those raw copies, and they've been pretty steady. So I went on and left this as steady, but then I'll be back, because yeah, you could get better deals both on raw copies and on 9.8s if you're patient. So with that, we're going to move into some MCU rumors and actual news before we finish up with a couple Star Wars books. First on the MCU related stuff was Deadpool, The Circle Chase number 1. This is first solo title for Deadpool, this miniseries. And this is basically that Feige finally confirmed Deadpool was coming to the MCU. A lot of people can no longer afford that New Mutants 98, so they go with this. They were going with this instead. Raw copies were going for 15, 9.8s were up to 130, which just tells you how many of these actually exist, that was hot at the time. And this book has actually continued to creep up. Raw copies are 10 to 40, 9.8s are 175 to 200, so this has been pretty worth it from those prices back then. And I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised. I know there's a bunch of these, but I'm a little surprised that 9.8s are only 175, 200, given the nature of this cover and how the all black cover and that kind of stuff. But apparently there's enough of them that it's keeping that price around that $175, $200 range. Next, we have Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 16, first appearance of Monica Rambeau. And this was week 2 of WandaVision, where she made her first appearance in the show. This book was going for $65 raw, 9.8 hit $670. If you know anything, by the time this show ended, the book was significantly higher than this price. Now it's a $50 to $100 book raw. 9.8s are going $1,200 to $1,700, which is both down a little bit from the peak from the show, but still going pretty strong. So this has definitely been up, definitely kind of a straight cash book for the last 6 months anyway. So yeah, obviously this is a character we know they have future plans for, and had a pretty good role in the show. So there you go. Next we have Fantastic Four number 94, first appearance of Agatha Harkness. And we had seen Agnes in the first episode, and everybody was speculating that is who Catherine Hahn was going to be. We'd actually been speculating that for a while. And yeah, so back then raw copies were up to 125. 9.6 went for $875. Now raw copies are 50 to 200, depending on the grade and condition. 9.2 recently went for 700. That's the only kind of high grade sale. So there's not a lot of high grade slabs out there on the market, a lot of mid grade stuff, but the only really comparable grade, and it's up. So I would say this has been pretty steady, kind of worth it for this Agatha Harkness. We just got news, I think this week, that Kevin Feige kind of confirmed that they were not done with Agatha, that she would be back in some form or in some show. So I'm looking forward to that, because I thought Catherine Hahn did a fantastic job. So next we have some more. This was more spec on WandaVision as opposed to actual characters we were already seeing, and that is Vision number 1, the first appearance of Viv Vision, who's pretty popular character that many people thought might come to this show. Back then, just based on spec, 9.8s were up to $300. This didn't happen. If you watch the show, this didn't happen. So spoilers, or non-spoilers, this wasn't a character that appeared. So now raw copies are down to $20 to $40. 9.8's down to $125, $200. So this has definitely been an I'll be back. You could actually argue a trap, because people were specking hard that she was going to be in the show. Here would be a spec. I don't do this very often, but I would say this is probably a book that's probably pretty reasonable to go after right now. So if she were to appear later in the MCU, don't know that she will, but now it's back down in a range that, it might be worth going after. So last 2 books are our 2 Star Wars books of the week. First up is Star Wars Kanan, The Last Padawan number 6, what people have decided is the first full appearance of Sabine Wren, Ezra Bridger, and Hera Syndulla. All characters I think people are specking on will come to live action Star Wars shows on Disney Plus. Especially Sabine is really where they're going, because we've seen Ahsoka, and the last time we saw both of them in the cartoon, they were together. So raw copies are going for $170 back then. 9.8s were sitting around $700. And this one's been pretty steady, a little bit of an I'll be back. Raw copies now are setting 125 to 200-ish. 9.8s are setting 6 to 750. My guess is these characters are coming at some point, but this is a pretty good buy-in for these if you still want to try to get in on them. I don't know what the ceiling is, but we're probably not there yet. But definitely not a cheap buy-in book like it was a year ago this time. So next we have Star Wars Tales from the Clone Wars Season 1. This is actually a graphic novel that was hitting the list. It's actually a collection of webcomics that contain the first appearance of Cad Bane. So this is actually Darth Maul #2, but it's really a different format and everything else. To me, his first true appearance in comic books is probably that Darth Maul #2, but this is just kind of a fun side quest. This little trade. Back then, the trade was going for $300. Now it's $90 to $185, but there's only been like 5 sales recently in the last few months. So this has definitely been it's definitely down. Definitely been an I'll be back. And that is our list for this week. So we had a few Star Wars books, a few MCU books, some comic buzz, a few covers. But mostly this week is more typical of what I would have seen a year plus ago doing this list, as opposed to what we've been seeing the last few months. More books are down. There's a couple of books that went up and several books that are steady. The proportions are more like what it was the first 2 year and a half, 2 years of doing this list than it has been recently, where we've had a lot more books that have continued to go up. So I want to thank you guys for watching. We have a little recap slide, and we'll catch you next time.